Welcome to Chaos in the Lobby. Today with me is Dean Hall, the founder and CEO of RocketWerkz, the studio behind games like Icarus, Stationeers, and of course, Kitten Space Agency. But many of you may also know him from the incredibly popular DayZ. For those that don't know, Kitten Space Agency is the spiritual successor to Kerbal Space Program, currently in development by his studio, RocketWerkz. It's being created from the ground up on a custom framework called Brutal. So, Dean, welcome, and thanks for taking the time out to chat with me.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
You founded RocketWerkz in 2014 after leaving Bohemia, where you were, of course, the project lead on DayZ. And just a couple years later, Take-Two and Private Division were making their decisions about who would develop Kerbal Space Program 2. And if I'm not mistaken, your studio had actually pitched to be considered for development of that game. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what exactly your pitch included and maybe what it was like hearing that they had decided to go a different way?
Yeah. So we made it through the first round. So we were in the last three studios, and actually it was while I was at GDC that after you submit the pitch and they go through it, they do kind of like a final interview with three bids. And so that interview was happening. It was done over like teleconference, and I was actually in San Francisco for GDC at the time. I remember it very specifically. And the phone call was really interesting because I think there was one member of the team who were assessing it who I think got it, who really got the pitch. Have you seen the pitch?
I have not, no.
Yeah, so it's basically it had no artwork in it at all, and I kind of addressed it at the start. That I really felt like the project was a technical problem that really required a heavy technical focus. Some projects are primarily art problems. Some projects, their main effort is more design, and it's more about how all the mechanics face in. But Kerbal Space Program, I really felt, particularly the second one, was going to be a technical problem, and particularly how to solve technical problems faster than you're making them, which is a very special kind of project. And I think one of the team members who was assessing it really got that, and I think really liked it, and really liked we had a heavy focus on community stuff. One of my points was that it should only be done with at least the support of the original creator, Felipe, who I knew. I'd met Felipe before.
Yeah.
So that was very central to it. And obviously content creators as well, because Kerbal Space Program, as you no doubt know, is an ecosystem. And that ecosystem involves players, it involves modders, content creators, and developers. And they're all not necessarily in it together, but they're all in a symbiotic relationship, and that requires dialogue, cooperation, sometimes tension, with customers and content creators sort of holding developers to account. Maybe that's the meaner way to put it, but I think definitely challenging things. A developer can never experience a product like a customer does. Anyway, but I knew from the call that it wasn't going very good because two of the people on the call were, one of the guys was probably, I would say, antagonistic, was kind of like,
Really?
how on earth did you submit a pitch without art? And kind of I got the vibe of, how on earth is this even in the top three pitches?
Oh, no.
And one of the guys I think got it, and the other guy sort of just wondered what was going on between the two of them. So I kind of knew we didn't get it at the end of that call. It was pretty obvious to me.
Okay.
Having said that, because I've seen people speculate on Reddit, I think the reality was we weren't a good enough studio to make that then. I knew that when I was working on DayZ, I knew I had heaps to learn. I'd learned a lot from the CEO, Marek, there, and part of me wishes I had stayed and continued working with Marek because I do really enjoy, and I learned a lot from him. But I knew that I needed to learn about running a studio and being a CEO, and that took a long time. And then building a technical team. So we weren't the studio we are today. We don't have the people that we have today. So I don't think we could have done even close to what we're doing now. That was a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, I appreciate it. Is that pitch up somewhere that people who are interested in watching it
It
and
is.
hearing?
It is. It got leaked. It's on it was on Reddit. I think it's called the Project Mercury was the code name that Take-Two gave the
Okay,
one of the other pictures got leaked at one point too.
I'll try and find
I
that
wonder.
and link that in the description because I'd actually
I'm
really
pretty
like
sure someone
to see it.
from yeah. I'm pretty sure someone from Take-Two must have been disgruntled when they got sacked and leaked the pictures.
Yeah, that's fair. But ultimately, I mean, hindsight being what it is, your strategy of building the game, from a technical standpoint, from the ground up, was the right decision. And I do want to talk a little bit more about your custom framework that you're calling Brutal. But before we get into that, when did you decide to move forward with your own modular rocket space sim? Was this a decision you had made before you heard about, Take-Two closing and the studio and KSP2 ending its active development?
Yeah, so it was a decision we made in the opposite direction. So we'd been developing Brutal, the framework, for a while, with the intention being that it would be used to make very difficult to make games. My personal feeling is that while Unity and Unreal and Godot and stuff like that, they have fantastic place, maybe even for the majority of games, they didn't really cut it for some kind of games. You have a lot of games that do their own custom stuff like Factorio, Barotrauma. A lot of these systems heavy games, you really have to approach it. So we were like, we want a tool that does exactly what we want to be able to deliver those kinds of games. And just after that team first got the framework, very early version of it. Actually, the first prototype I made was called Orbit, and it was basically just a little celestial sim. It was just a little simulation of the moon, the Earth, and a bunch of planets going around. I still have it somewhere. And we did a very serious assessment as to whether our first game using Brutal would be a Kerbal Space Program like game. What we ended up deciding was that technically we could probably deliver it, but the fact that even if Kerbal Space Program 2 was bad and continued to be received poorly, it was so big as a license and so beloved
Right.
that there was just no competing it for a small studio like ours. So we actually shelved it and said, nope, we're going to go forward with some other projects. It's kind of, think about it like this. If let's say Unreal and Unity are engines that make it way easier to make games.
Yeah.
Let's accept that as fact. Now it's really easy to make all the games that Unity and Unreal are good at making. So why would you want to make those games? One thing I did learn in business, I didn't learn necessarily much at university, was try not to make products that everybody else is making.
Right.
Because there's a lot of competition there. So that was where, we did an assessment and said, we just don't think that works. And then by pure sort of fate, 2 months later, the war notice got released, and we knew that was going to give us 2 months to talk about it when they couldn't do anything. And we could talk with all of the staff that they were letting go. So we started talking to people. I flicked a message off to Felipe immediately and said, hey, can we fly you to New Zealand like right now? I want to I don't even want to tell you what we're doing. I want you to come and see it and feel the vibe. So it was a decision in the opposite direction. We actively decided not to make it, and then 2 months later, just by fate, we got to dust that off.
Yeah, I can imagine going up against a massive name like KSP2 would have been a monumental challenge. But of course, Brutal is your custom framework, and all of this is being built upon it now. And I've heard you say that within Brutal, and all of the things that are being added to the game are kind of mods themselves. And that has a lot of people excited because it means that they may have an easier time potentially doing more to mod this game than they've been able to do with other games in the past. So I guess my question is what are your plans for Brutal beyond KSA? I know Harvester is working on a new project that uses Brutal as a framework, but is this something that's going to stay in-house, or is it something you plan to maybe sell or release at some point?
I mean, definitely, but I actually think, especially over time, I'm less and less of a good salesperson. I find selling stuff rather distasteful, I suppose. Or not distasteful. It's just a waste of my time.
Right.
I just want to make games. I want to make stuff. The only reason we're making this tool is because it was becoming too frustrating to make the kind of games that I wanted. And that's not a criticism of necessarily other tools. It's more maybe an assessment of the kind of games that I wanted to make. They don't, in fact, more and more as it goes on, I'm just really maybe not interested in making something that's super mass market. I'm just very interested in the kind of games that I want.
Yeah.
I was a little late to this interview because I was finishing off
Oh,
putting my character in a sleeper in our playtest for one of our games. Um, so yes, I think I'm interested in making it available for other people, but I want to make sure it works before. I think too often products, particularly that are sold to other companies, like business to business stuff, is pushed out way too early. So if you think about it at the moment, so Awu actually manages the Brutal and helps ship it as well as they've helped to push out KSA. So if you think about it, we need to actually verify like a sea trial, you're testing your rocket before you put a customer's payload on it. I really think like that's really important, and I wish more businesses did that. So I wanted to make sure that my businesses did that first.
and you couldn't have asked for a better group of people to be testing it. I mean, bringing people together like BlackRack, Jamie, and Daichi, and of course Harvester. I mean, along with so much other incredible talent. I mentioned to Felipe, it kind of felt from the outside looking in like this almost Avengers Assemble moment. I'm curious what those first meetings were like once you had everybody on board, like once you flew Harvester out and once you had BlackRack and Jamie and Daichi. And I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of cautionary tales being shared about, you know, what it was like at KSP2. And I'm wondering if there were maybe some ideas that had gotten traction or hadn't gotten traction previously, or features that are still in that maybe bucket that, or anything that you really loved, but is maybe not reasonably achievable.
I think we're still coming out of that first phase and I was very big on this. I was very big on we're not going to sit around and talk about all the amazing stuff we could do later on. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about all the boring stuff, all the foundational work. So I wanted us to iterate on the celestial simulation side of it until the point we were absolutely sick of it. And we did. We iterated on that so much that literally at every steering, people were like, oh my God, when can we start looking at parts? When can we start doing something else? But I think that if people play the pre-alpha now, you see that. Sure, there's no real part building and stuff like that. There's no part interaction, you're not right clicking on parts. But man, if that simulation doesn't work well, and that's what Harvester actually noted in our last steering group. He said that psychologically, he keeps slowing down the warp time for SOI transfers. And I realized I do the same thing. And that whereas if you just warp through that SOI boundary, there's no change, no loss in precision, no anything, no hitching. So we really iterate on that. So those first meetings, really, I was kept on bringing us back to, guys, we're not going to sit down and talk about colonies and stuff like that. We're going to talk about all the boring groundwork. So we really got very into detail into that. I also think there was a lot of almost sharing of trauma through, because a lot of people were not familiar with Felipe's very sad story of him creating this amazing thing and really getting none of the wealth out of it at all.
Yeah, which is a real shame. I was shocked to hear how he was
I
treated.
mean, it's a cosmic tragedy that I think is repeated far too often with things that happen. So, but also I think there was a lot of skepticism as well, as because the pitch for Brutal was, and the approaches that we are planning on taking with KSA were very extreme. So things like, there's no scene, there's no 0-0, 0-0, the camera never moves, just a whole bunch of, it was a pretty out there proposal. One advantage we had is that we had a prototype that we did in about 2 months of intense work to prove out the spherical billboarding. And that worked to an extent. And that, so that that was pretty good overall. I think so. We kind of had some confidence there, but I think as we were bringing on new people, they were pretty skeptical. They were like, "Wait, you're effectively making your own engine from scratch,
Yeah.
with just your studio money? Like this is crazy." So a lot of it involved actually flying people out and seeing the team behind Brutal. Seeing the work that we done on the prototype, and that was, I think, more encouraging.
If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can do so through Patreon or by joining my channel here on YouTube, where you'll get members-only exclusives like early access to new episodes, members-only videos, and extras. Plus, you'll be helping me focus on getting my next guest and creating new content. Yeah, I wonder if, when you were making the pitch and I'm sure discussing building it on its own potential engine and framework, if that is something that maybe scared a lot of people, because you hear that and you think, okay, it's going to be 10 years or it's going to be at least 5 years, or, it really extends that runway of there's so much groundwork to do before you get started. Do you think that was maybe part of the consideration to go with ultimately Intercept Games?
I think, again, we're a different studio and I'm a different person than when I made that pitch.
Fair.
And you can actually see that in our products. So Stationeer's released to, mixed. Icarus released to mixed, pretty deep in the mixed too. Stationeer's recently hit, for a while there, it was actually overwhelmingly positive in recent reviews now. And Icarus is well into the mostly positive, on its way to very positive. But that didn't happen by accident. That happened by, in Icarus's case, updating the game every single week without missing a single week. We're just coming up to the 4-year birthday.
That's impressive.
So it's impressive, but it was hard work, and that just demonstrates that we really had to sort of turn the product around. And look, I can sit here and argue all the reasons why we made stumbles, and I can put my hand on my heart and say we did our best, but that doesn't change the fact that the work needed to be done and we had to go do the work. So I think we've spent 10 years getting the studio to where it is now.
Yeah.
And the idea is we didn't want to make the same mistakes we were making in the past. We want to make new mistakes. But I think you touched on a good point. Well, were other people scared? I think we're scared about the approaches we're taking with KSA. People ask me sometimes, what am I unsure about? And I'm kind of like, I'm unsure about everything. Like, so much about what we're doing with this is new and different. And that is very scary. But I'm also very sure that if we keep doing what we were doing, it wasn't working. And eventually, sure, we're just making it, for the last 2 or 3 years, we've been just pulling it through. So I was like, that means that we can't afford a single stumble. If the studio has a single stumble, we'll close down. And you just see that happening with studios again and again. So I was like, we have to try and start doing different approaches. And that, yeah, but I think at the time of the proposal, we weren't there. We weren't there in reality. I still like to think, hey, we have delivered on every project we've done eventually. And I'm very proud of that. But it's been hard to do those for sure.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of both Icarus and Stationeers. So incredible work by everybody who's been working on those. Before we get too far off of topics of, you mentioned colonies and multiplayer and the different features that are in Kitten Space Agency. One of the most talked about features is colonies, at least in my comment section. And it's usually people interested in hearing about exactly how they're going to work and what role they'll have in the overall gameplay loop of KSA. And I know you said you're focusing on a lot of the core work first, but do you mind sharing a little bit about how you see colonies fitting into KSA?
Perhaps one of the biggest problems with colonies is that the word means completely different things. If you talk to two people who are interested in colonies, they will have entirely different views of what they are. I think for me, what I like most about colonies and what I've tried to do in the past and my own KSP games is around logistics. And I was a logistics officer in the Air Force, so logistics is pretty close to my heart. So I definitely see logistics as being a very interesting system for it. There's probably 2 systems that I'm personally extremely interested in. Jamie probably messages me on the team probably every couple of days, because I know he's very interested in comms and stuff like that as well. I was a former signals officer in the Army, so I'm very interested in ScanSat type stuff
Yeah.
and comms relays and that. So I'm just waiting for us to get some more part stuff in, and I'll get our my first prototype of CommsNet in. So look, I think logistics is a big thing that I want us to see happen. There's a lot of disadvantages to developing this with Brutal, but one of the advantages is that it's extremely high performance because it's very low touch in terms of if you're going to make a class. If you're going to make a class for a kitten or something like that, it's really just what you've written in C#. Like there's no fat on top of it. Whereas if you look at Unreal or Unity, if you're going to do your own sort of abstract class, you then have to sort of bring in an imposter, almost like a ballet dancer picking up another ballet dancer to move it around. We don't have to do any of that, so that means that we can kind of push it in directions. Yeah. So I would say, to me, colonies means logistics primarily. I think there is a danger of trying to layer too many games in one game.
Yeah.
And I think a great game is more about what you don't put in it, more than what you do. Yeah.
I love that answer because logistics is what I was actually hoping to hear. I love the idea of life support and supply routes and maybe automating launches if that's on the table. But another feature that gets mentioned all the time is obviously multiplayer. And anyone who has seen some of my videos knows that multiplayer is a feature that I could personally live without. I know tons of people, maybe most people, are going to disagree with me on that. But how do you personally, or how does the team envision multiplayer working? Because you have a lot of problems to solve with like discrepancies in the desire to time warp or variations in warp between multiple
Yeah,
players.
so we were talking about this before as steering group. Actually, if the studio is good at one thing, it's actually multiplayer. Most of my professional background in games has been involved in very technical multiplayer. So Stationeers is a good example. We originally used Unity's multiplayer package and had a lot of problems with it. Unity actually abandoned it. It was called UNet. We replaced it with our own variation of RackNet, which is called RocketNet. And actually, Stationeers multiplayer was the precursor to Brutal. So we'd formed this team that would make high performance libraries to deliver to spec. And the first library they made was actually taking a immediate mode UI, one that I'd taken from a library and making it not Dean code. And the second one they did was RocketNet. And that gave us a scale improvement and performance of 3 orders of magnitude. So times 1,000 sometimes the amount of data that we could send and the performance
Wow.
of it. And so we've integrated RocketNet already into KSA. So actually, multiplayer is one of the things I'm perhaps most comfortable of. The studio just has a very good technical. It's kind of in our DNA. A lot of our staff have a lot of experience in multiplayer. And in fact, I said at the steering group, I'm more uncomfortable when we're making a single player game
Okay.
because we're less experienced with that. Multiplayer is what we tend to find. So if you take Icarus, most people play the game by themselves. But those people playing it by themselves actually want to play it with someone else. So one of our pillars of Icarus was actually it's fun to play alone. But someone needs to be able to drop in and join you at any one point. And that was how we designed it. We designed it to be, hey, you can just be in there playing it by yourself. And anytime your friend wants to come join you, they can just ad hoc in and just join you. And I think, multiplayer is one of those things where a lot of people want it, but they don't necessarily always use it, but they really like it to be there because it's sort of a force multiplier on the experience. So that means making a lot of concessions in terms of how time warp works. And again, not just putting every feature in there. So I'm actually not worried at all about multiplayer. The broad approach that we're taking to rendering and all that kind of stuff actually came from when I was working on a game called Art of the Rail, which we have been porting to Brutal. We had to pause development for a little bit, just in favor of putting the engineers who were working on that onto KSA, just to give it that little bit of extra nod. But we'll be back working on that hopefully soon. And that is really designed from the ground up as a multiplayer game, and KSA is using the architecture that was developed for that.
Oh, interesting. How do you personally see the time warp working? Would people, I know a lot of ideas have been floated around on Reddit and YouTube comments about people voting maybe on warping, or would the host be in control of it, or is there a way to have different people experience different warps?
Yeah, so look, there's a lot of ways to do different stuff, and you have like dark multiplayer and that very much prove those with KSA. We need to develop a very specific experience. So our choice is to go for what I would call either cooperative or competitive, or coexistence multiplayer. So that's something that we're really pushing at the moment in Stationeers. The playtest we're doing is the first time we're testing out what's called round robin, where players playing Stationeers can actually drop down at different points and build their own bases. So you're playing almost single player together. And I think that's the either cooperative or coexisting is kind of the broad approach. So that means a shared time warp allows us to cut down the data that we have to hold dramatically, because we don't need to sort of keep a ledger of what's coming up and transfer that. So to be, I suppose the biggest inspiration was Paradox Games and their approach to warp. You can actually give the host a few options. The host could allow anyone to change the warp, which sometimes in Paradox Games you get that, or only the host can change the warp, or some kind of vote system. But I definitely think our decision is for a shared warp.
Okay. Yeah. And Kitten Space Agency is currently trying to do something, taking a little bit of a different approach to release. Not only are people getting a very early look at the game, as well as sort of a tech demo for Brutal, really. You plan to release the game ideally entirely free, funded by contributions, where people can give what they feel the game is worth in its current state. And the early alpha build has been out now for almost a week and has already managed to raise roughly $75,000, which is obviously fantastic. Is that in line with what your expectations and your goals were for the first week?
So I think if you think about it, we kind of we knew we had to try some different ways about how we wanted to approach stuff. And look, I think there was sort of an understatement in there. It's an extremely different approach that we're taking with it.
Yeah.
Having said that, Felipe, while we were doing the release, Felipe was actually in the Discord with us, our work Discord, and he pointed out several times the approach we're taking is almost exactly the same as KSP started.
Yeah.
It was free. It was only available on Squad's website. And Felipe was pushing out builds and talking with the community just constantly. Factorio was the same. Rimworld was the same. Barotrauma had a different name. I can't remember what it was, but it was the same. So it's funny because often people are like, wow, this is crazy. This is different. And it's like, certainly our start is not different. I think, though, if we want video game studios like RocketWerkz to survive as they are, those studios have to change, and customers have to change their relationship with them. And I would argue it's pretty similar to how people have to change when it comes to their content creators they like yourself. I am not a content creator. I occasionally do streams and videos, and it's extremely difficult. I can't do it. It's also very stressful.
I get nervous every single time. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I should get a haircut, and it's just a lot of there's a lot of stuff and a lot of I find it really hard to split my time focusing on the game and talking and stuff. Anyway, people have had to think about their relationship with their favorite content creators, because if they want their content creators to make content, they can no longer rely reliably on advertising and stuff like that. So those content creators have to develop a personal relationship, and if people want to see that content, they kind of have to enter this moral bargain with themselves that they need to support, including financially, their content creators if they're able. And I really think it's not my favorite route for small and medium game developers, but I think it's the only one. I think Steam is looking more and more like the iOS store. When I actually had a long career history in game development before DayZ, and I was actually working at a studio that's now called Pickpock, a mobile studio, right when they started getting into mobile. And the iOS App Store was actually amazing. In the early days, it was amazing. If you
Yeah.
made a good game, you would make so much money. Just a good game. That's all you had to do. You had to make a good game and put it out there. But then over time, it changed. And now it's like you need to spend $100 million on just advertising, not on development, on advertising. It's all that. And I think that I think the reality of what Steam is for developers hasn't caught up with developers. They're ignoring the numbers because we would look at our numbers and be like, this is not sustainable. And Icarus was one of the most popular debuts on
Yeah.
Steam of its year. It still has 6,000, a peak concurrent of like 6,000 people. This 4 years later, and we just we're not making any profit to speak of from the whole studio. So if that game and our studio has been just kind of going from careful step to careful step, how is everybody else doing? So yeah, again, a very long-winded answer. I think my expectations for how it went, my expectation was anything more than 0 was a win. This is a completely new approach. We've never in the studio's history had people subscribe to giving us regular money. And we have, I think, 100 people now. 100 people have signed up to give us monthly contributions. Think about it like this. We've been developing Stationeers for like 7 years consistently, releasing updates. In many cases, people have paid, say, $20, $30 for the game. Now, we only get about half of that once deductions and Steam's cart and stuff like that's taken. So that means our lifetime from that customer might only be $15, whereas now we have some people signing up saying, hey, we really like what you're doing. We want to see you exist.
Yeah.
So we're going to give you $10 a month. So look, it's new territory, and I think it's fantastic to see that. We need to learn a lot as we go about it. So it definitely, I think it's a fantastic start. I hope it gives some people confidence that there might be a way for us to deliver the project like this. It's the way I want to release games. I'd rather release games for free and then have people decide whether they want to keep our content existing, and then we should be open about how much money we're making. So if we're making $100 million, I think people should know that, and then that should build expectations into the products that we're delivering, into how much we're paying people, how many people we're hiring, all of that kind of stuff. I really think that having that open is the best way forward. So I hope I can make that work.
Yeah, I think it's incredible. I love the idea, and I appreciate you taking the risk and forging that path. But when people do hear free to play, the first thing that pops into a lot of people's heads is, oh, okay, microtransactions, or there's going to be content paywalls, and you've been pretty vocal about saying that those are not going to be part of this. So if the contributions model doesn't meet the goals set out for funding the game, what is Plan B? What does that look like?
I think Plan B is probably maybe putting someone else in charge, because I think that will probably show that I'm just wrong. And also, I kind of reached a point a year or so ago, a couple of years ago, I was really hating running a game company. It was funny because I would wake up and I would see a whole bunch of angry customers, or people saying that our DLCs were cash grabs and stuff like that. And then I would look at the company accounts and I'd be like, okay, well, if someone's getting the cash grab, it's not me. The only person who's probably getting the cash grab is Gabe to buy a new $500 million yacht. Certainly not me. So I'm making no money. I've put tens of 20s of millions of dollars worth all my money into the game studio, and I'm getting nothing out of it. My staff aren't necessarily always super happy either. So probably 3 years ago, I was not. I was like, why am I doing this? I hate it. I kind of having to coax myself to go to work in the morning. And Brutal and this new approach definitely gave me sort of a lease of life of actually enjoying what I was doing and feeling motivated that it was a way I wanted to work, because otherwise we would do all this free work with Icarus or Stationeers, and then we'd be like, okay, and now we need to make we're going to give all that away for free, but we need to make this other content that we have to sell. So now we're off making furniture or whatever. And half the time we'd make these decorative DLCs and nobody would buy them. So with Stationeers, the DLC and the supporters DLC just doesn't sell. People just don't buy the cosmetic DLC.
Oh, interesting.
So in many cases, we would spend money making the DLC, and it could take us 4 years to make that money back, or if ever. Whereas Icarus was a bit different. Actually, all the companion DLC pays for the whole studio. So, so I think the way forward might be that, and to go with a more traditional route, probably. But I think, I think I'm probably not alone in saying that because I know Felipe, I don't want to necessarily put words in his mouth, but I think his experience of the unpleasantness of business and releasing games more traditionally, and the emotional toll of that, I think he's kind of like me, and that he really wants to find a different way. So I think, I would probably go work on games and just release them for free, and just maybe not work on it. Just sort of retire and release free games or something.
Yeah, that's fair. For those, I think this is a great time to point out, for those that want to try out Kitten Space Agency right after this episode, you can do so by going to ahwoo.com. That's ahwoo.com. The link will be in the description below, and there you can download the current public build as well as contribute to the project. Your contributions will help the game reach a full launch without including any sort of DRM or unnecessary API. But speaking of DRMs and API, I know the next question has been asked a dozen times, and I'm sure you're going to answer it a dozen more. But for those that don't know, why have you decided to not do a Steam release, even if the game is going to be free?
Yeah, first thing I should note too, when you go to Ahwoo, a good example of sort of API, so at the moment you have to log in to download. Partially that is a gate thing, because we have to pay for downloads. So we don't just want people grabbing a link and just rehosting it on a site or something like that. Putting a little bit of friction in there helps keep our initial costs down for hosting the file size. Longer term, we'd like to move to a peer-to-peer model, which also breeds in resilience. So if our site goes down, the site still, the game will download just fine. But at the moment, people need, there's two options. Either they can log in using an email, any email, even just a throwaway one, or Discord. That was more just a product of time. We'd love to do, a lot of sites do, you can log in with Google and all these things. We just run out of time to do that. So there's only the two options at the moment. Anyway, in terms of API, so one of my bigger criticisms of Valve is that if you implement the Steam API, you can only use the Steam API on Steam. So that means if you take Stationeers, which works on Steam, or it works completely fine off Steam, we had to build a whole companion API to do all of the stuff that Steam does, like achievements and multiplayer and all of that. We had to build a whole separate infrastructure and the Steam infrastructure. Whereas with Ahwoo, we're replicating all of that, but we're going to say, as long as you have your game on Ahwoo, you can use that API anywhere. So even if a customer gets it for free on some other site, they can still use the Ahwoo API for achievements and multiplayer networking and all that kind of stuff. Because it's extremely difficult, especially as a small or medium developer, to have to implement multiple APIs. Also, every time I've gone to Valve and said, hey, could you do some Discord integration in your API? And they're like, we might do our own voice service one day. And then it was like, could you please put Twitch integration in your API? And they're like, we might do our own streaming service one day. And they did a partial implementation of those two, I might add, but then sort of abandoned them. So that was the thing. It was like, okay, we really don't like this sort of API salad where everybody has an API and it's can only be used on this platform. It's probably not something that's apparent to customers, but it makes game development, which is already very difficult and expensive, so much more difficult and expensive. I really don't like how companies like Steam, Microsoft, whoever, want to own an API and own every part of it. So we were like, actually, if RWoo has an API, it should take the best-in-class implementations. If someone else has done a really great voice chat, just integrate that API for your customers so that they can use it anywhere, and just give that away for free. It should just be for free. Anyone can have it there, because your service should be good enough that people then just use that. So that's probably the big one. I also I have some serious personal objections to gambling, just very serious. In my own life, I lost several friends to problem gambling. One of them ended up, he actually killed himself over problem gambling.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And we have, there's a university in Australia that's actually done some research that's shown that particularly young men in the I think their study was in the 13 to 17-year-old age group, are highly susceptible to developing problem gambling as a result of playing games like Counter-Strike and stuff like that. We need more research on it. I actually talk with them quite a bit, and I've been sort of old man yell at clouds about this for a while, and they suggested actually what I should be doing is encouraging game developers like Valve to make their data available to universities. So if they believe that they're not a cause of gambling, then work with those universities and provide them the data, and let's prove that. Because certainly the early data indicates that's not the case, and that loot boxes and a bunch of those approaches are terrible. I'm very just anti-gambling in general. I think lotteries are just attacks on flaws in humans' ability to understand probabilities. So I have some big problems with the fact that the only innovation that Valve has really done has been around Counter-Strike and gambling. I also, and the Steam subscriber agreement, if you go look at it, the Steam EULA, you can see that you only have a license to play the game. So people talk about their Steam library, but actually it's not your Steam library; it's Steam's library, and they're just renting you those games. And that's most apparent when someone passes and they want to hand over their Steam library to their children or something. They can't do that.
Really? I actually didn't know that. You can't pass it on.
Definitely can't, though. And if they figure that out, they'll close down your account. It comes up every now and then on the Steam subreddit. Look, I mean, I won't fault Valve in terms of everybody was doing that. That's how everybody was doing it. But just because that's how everybody was doing it, I don't think that's the best way. Right. I think that we should be making a push back towards you owning something. And I think if you own something, I think we should also at the same time be pushing people to know how things are made. They should know how their games are made. They should know how much people are paid to make them. They should know how much those games are making. And they should have they should take on a moral responsibility of ensuring that if someone is making content they like, that person can continue to make them, whether that be a content creator or a game developer. And I guess that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. I know a lot of people, speaking of making multiple versions of something, I know that a lot of people have already managed to get KSA working on Linux, for example. But are there plans to make a Linux and Mac version of KSA?
So as we've been working with Brutal, a number of our Brutal engineers, so our actually head of engineering, who's ex-Grinding Gear Games, he uses Mac for all his development. We make sure it boots, we make sure things run and stuff like that on both that, and a number of our engineers use Linux. But in terms of, there's quite a big difference between making sure it runs and supporting it as a product. They're two kind of different things, and really it just comes down to a numbers game. As it already is, we're spending 10 or 20 times as much on KSA as we'll be getting in revenue. So, we're watching that needle pretty tightly. A lot of, I'd love to do a native Linux deploy, and I suppose I have a hope inside me that that's the case. But hope isn't a strategy, or it certainly isn't a good one. So I think we'll just have to see. I think it really depends on how we do as time goes on. I'd certainly love to see us do at the very least, a a Linux build, and that would help out with things like potentially like the Steam Deck and the Steam Machine and stuff like that, for people running it on those. As well as, Mac would be fantastic as well, just in terms of reaching, maybe a slightly wider audience.
Yeah. And we've also seen some incredible work coming from BlackRock, especially in terms of cloud variance and movement. And we've seen a few dust storms. I was also wondering, is weather planned to affect the craft, or is wind speeds going to change, and that maybe affects launch windows? Is there any plan for anything like that?
Yeah, so I believe, I don't want to necessarily put words in or make decisions for BlackRock, but when we last talked about it, those were certainly things that he was very interested in doing. He's kind of a lot like us in that he's very much wanting to do the boring stuff first, and bearing in mind that he has worked both in KSP as a modder, but inside KSP2 as a developer, um, for quite a long time. So he's very familiar with the encountering difficulties later on. So I think he really wants to make sure the groundwork of everything is right so they can deliver on other stuff. But certainly I think there is a belief in the project that weather should play a factor in your experience. Definitely.
I love that. BlackRock's work has just been endlessly impressive, and the idea of having to plan launches around that, I think I think that's really exciting. Um, I do have a few more questions just about some of the more minute features. Uh, People are wondering if they're going to be able to customize the cats to look like their own pets.
Yeah, so this comes up a lot, and I never have the time to go reply about it in Reddit or on the YouTube comments. I always say to myself, oh, I need to go back and reply to that person and give them an answer because it's a really good question. I think a few people have said it. You might have seen it, that when we were looking at what we wanted to do, nobody really wanted to do kittens. It wasn't like we were sitting down saying, we have to make this Kitten Space Agency. We were coming up with different ideas, and Kittens was the one that didn't fail, basically. It was the one that ticked all the boxes and was still left on the paper when we'd excluded everything else. So, I am a massive fan. My favorite animal in New Zealand is the kea. Are you familiar with the kea at all?
Yeah,
It's a mountain parrot.
Yeah.
It's the only mountain parrot in the world. It's this wonderful emerald green color feathers, and under its wing, it actually has this beautiful orange color, and they have this beautiful call that echoes when you hear it in the mountains. And
cool.
they actually spend their summers deep up in the snow, high up in the mountains, and they come down into the lowlands for winter because it gets a bit too cold for them. And they're incredibly playful. They believe they may be even more smarter than dolphins. They have to design special rubbish bins. There's a video online of them moving road cones to trick cars.
Really?
They're incredibly playful. They teach each other through play. They're just everything I love. So I would have loved to have made Kitten Space Agency, but the problem was just animating them and the risks associated with it. This is one of the challenges of not using an engine. We have to do everything ourselves, which means we don't get given an animation pipeline or any of that stuff, which is why actually getting the kittens in for launch was really a complete miracle in and of itself, and especially with it looking the way it did. So, but one of the reasons that kittens were still on the list as things were getting excluded is cats have a lot of natural variance. So if you think about it, there's all different kinds. The cats look very different. It's kind of easy with controlling a few sliders to make cats look really different, which then gives the individual catastronauts, I think Shadow Zone was calling them in a recent video, which I kind of like. The catastronauts, or whatever we're calling them.
That was my next question, actually.
I don't know. I think the community should help decide that one. I think we've made enough decisions. They'll be called Kitten Face or something. Anyway, was the individual variants, because something I'm very particular on. I guess there's not too many captain's calls, but one of them is I think it's vital that we make people care about the people that we're sending into space, because coming from an Air Force background, that it runs through aerospace completely. That's probably the first one, and the second one is I don't want it to be just about the kittens that are sent into space too. That for every astronaut there'll be 10,000 people on the ground doing things from sewing space suits through to preparing flight times to preparing trajectories. And these people have spent their entire lives studying and working. And I think the game should celebrate those people as well.
Yeah.
And those people care to every inch of their bone. If you've ever met people who work in this area, every inch of their bodies is doing everything they can for the safety of those people who are sent into harm's way. And I think if there's a spirit that I manifestly believe should be represented in a game that is trying to inspire people to be interested in science and to traveling to other worlds, it's that. And I probably argued, I probably, this is the only thing I really probably just dug my heels on, because I think Felipe definitely had a view slightly different on that you can see from the Kerbals being throwaway. But I think every game should take its own path, and I think that's one that I'm just very passionate about, because I genuinely believe that if we do a good job with this, that the first people to land on some of the other worlds, they may well have been inspired by playing this. And I think that some kid somewhere, or even an adult somewhere, should play this and realize that there are thousands of people out there with a shared vision and unity to trying to keep these people safe, and how difficult that is, and also how amazing that is. That's something I think we should celebrate as a society, that we tend to focus on the bad parts, but in many cases that people have a lot of empathy at rescuing people. Look at Apollo 13,
Yeah.
and I think that's just so important. I think that's so important. So that's why a very long-winded explanation of why I think Kittens kind of won, because it was like, how are we going to make Kia, which very hard to tell the difference and animate them. Whereas with Kittens, yeah, we can deliver different colors, we can deliver different patterns. You can change a slider to change the length of the fur. There's a mask that affects where on the mesh the fur length is bigger, so you could do Maine Coons, you could do
Cool.
whatever you want.
Was it just the beak that I think Kiwis we were also floated at one point. Was it just the beak that gives it a
So
problem?
in animation, so much of animation and animation tooling and pipelines is really well designed around bipedal animation. Out of the box, in any 3D software, you just get given a whole bunch of bipedal rigging tools.
Yeah.
Obviously, because a lot of animation using arms and legs.
Yeah.
And so it's just that just gives you something really easy to start from. And every animator is really used to doing bipedal animations, even if the proportions are a little weird. So that meant it was just going to be easier. And a lot of the decisions that I try and make early are compromises to try and ease us later on.
Okay. And I don't know if this is something that you can talk about yet, but is there a timeline in place for maybe when we'll see a vehicle editor in place, or our ability to build our own ships and launch them?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've fiddled around with the debug tool that's in there now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actively working on that. You can see from the changelog that's there now on Discord that actually all the parts are coming in with attachment nodes now. This is actually something we've been working on for quite a while. I actually don't know if this is, no, I don't think it's posted. Jamie, yesterday, while I'm in a playtest, he just randomly sends me messages on Slack sometimes. He actually posted a message in our internal Discord, maybe, of us doing a separation of a vehicle, so separating a stage and stuff like that. So we're working on, again, I guess, the boring parts of a lot of this stuff. And I think, so there we go. I'll bring it up on stream. It might be a little difficult to see. So that's actually a vehicle in two parts. So
Very cool.
Jamie sent me that. So so all of that is required for us to be able to deliver a vehicle editor. I guess people tend to look and galvanize around, oh, how's the VAB going to look and stuff like that. But really, that's kind of almost in some ways a solved problem. Also, we have Felipe, who literally made KitHack, which has probably some of the best vehicle editing I've ever seen, which is not surprising because Felipe put a lot of time into it in KSP, and he was cutting a lot of new ground. I think people don't realize there's a lot of new ground cut when KSP first came out.
Yeah.
So we have all of that wealth of experience to rely on, but I think it will feel like we're fiddling around the edges until the last minute, and then it'll be like, oh, look at all that. But yeah, we have to deal with staging, we have to deal with decoupling and part interaction and node points and all that kind of boring stuff that's just going to happen almost in the background, and then all of a sudden it will just come together.
And you mentioned that people, you hoped that people would be inspired by this game, and I think that they will, because as we've seen, Kerbal Space Program did inspire a lot of people to enter, various fields, various STEM fields, and we did see a Kerbal plushie end up on the International Space Station. And I think it's just so indicative of the exact type of game that Kerbal Space Program is. It gives people the ability to kind of imagine themselves as something other than they are, something that they wish they were. And it's just such a fundamental human thing to imagine that as something that we maybe aren't. And a game that allows us to expand on those fantasies beyond, the confines of the game and what it lays out. Is such a rare thing, and it's difficult to achieve. I think you even mentioned when you play Kerbal Space Program, you keep a logbook
I do.
of your missions.
I saw people, someone else on Reddit, I think, was like, oh man, it's on my other PC. It's on, I have 3 PCs here, so I can test multiplayer. And it's actually on this PC here. Yeah, I keep a log. I think a good example of, and again, we shouldn't just be inspiring people to be astronauts or pilots. I think we should be also inspiring people to be engineers and scientists.
Absolutely.
And support people and all of those kinds of things. So that's where I am very interested, and it was included in the original pitch that we did for KSP2. Was I quite like some of Paradox's approaches to games around having advisors and things like that. So if you imagine, it would be really cool if you're not just recruiting kittens to be your astronauts, but you're actually recruiting kittens to have different positions inside your agency. And sometimes, like with Deke Slayton, you can actually have an astronaut then move into these other areas to provide you bonuses. And I really like that idea. I also think it's never been more important for us to inspire people to be interested in science. Rather, we're very good at teaching people. I think we've actually become, over, at least in my lifetime, we've become even better at teaching people. But it's very difficult to teach someone if they're not interested in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where games, more than movies or even books, are really good, just insanely good at inspiring people. I think too many games, people jump and say, oh, we should use games to teach people. I don't think they're necessarily great at that, but I think they're fantastic at inspiring people. And I think those are the games that I'm most interested in. Unfortunately, they're the games that sell the least. Stationeers has consistently been a massive loss for the studio, even though we've developed it for 7 years.
Really?
But it's
I'm
one
a
of
huge
our
fan
most
of Stationeers. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we spend far more money making stationeers than we make. Actually, for most of the year, KSP2 was outselling stationeers. It's actually had a little bit of a resurgence, and now we're actually, I think, if you look, we're actually slightly outselling KSP2. But that just kind of shows you where we are at with the market. And that was why I'm more interested in making games like KSP and stationeers and stuff like that, but we need to find a better way to sell them. And then I hope that we can use those games to inspire, not necessarily just educate. I'm not really super interested in pure education games, because I think actually the education system is actually very good at teaching people. You just have to get them interested first.
Yeah. Well, I just love games that, like you said, you keep a logbook, and I love games that get people playing outside of the confines of the game, like people who add in, some people with KSP, for example, were calculating their delta V or adding up, okay, this stage will get me here, this stage will get me there. And I remember there was a Reddit thread some years ago where a group of friends had decided to plan a MUN mission, and somebody was going to fly it entirely IVA, and they were going to plan it without, using any of the in-game tools. And so one person actually went into a different room and spent hours in this room flying it IVA on a laptop with a walkie-talkie, and their friends kind of played mission control. doing the maths, and it was just such a fun
See, that's
experience.
multiplayer. That's
Yeah,
that cooperative multiplayer that we want. Um, and because I think some experiences are elevated when you do them together or at least beside each other, which is one of the reasons why with Stationeers we've been working on this update around a round robin play where each of the players land at a different spot. And they actually, it's almost as if you're playing it in multiplayer, sorry, in single player, but together.
that reminds me a
Um,
little bit of
but,
games back from like, Nintendo 64 and games where you'd be in the same room, kind of competing with each other, but doing your own thing. I love that idea.
Yeah, and I think that that can also elevate a learning experience as well. Um, as you each learn different things and then you share that experience. We're such a social species that I think there's a tremendous power that comes from that. Um, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. One of my favorite mods for KSP is actually called Final Frontier, which gives you little ribbons that is awarded. I'm a huge fan of that. Expect that something like that to be definitely part of KSA. I'm also a massive fan of all the IVA mods, particularly the one, and I've forgotten the name. I apologize to the creator of it. The one that lets you fly around in IVA. Our rendering approach is designed so that we can do very good IVA. And in fact, our subpart approach is intended to be used inside cockpits, which means that if you wanted to, if you imagine all the elements of a cockpit, all the gubbins and instruments are actually just subparts that you could then move around. So if you wanted to, you could actually go in and move stuff around inside a cockpit.
Oh,
Um,
that would be very cool. So we may have the
and the
ability
same
to,
way that
sorry.
yeah, and that helps us on a rendering front because we already do a lot of indirect rendering, or if you think about instance rendering. So instead of drawing each mesh separately, we say, well, we have all of these meshes and they're all exactly the same, but in different positions and rotations, maybe different colors and stuff like that. And we actually just send the mesh to the GPU once and then tell it to draw it 1 or 1,000 times, and it's much cheaper. So if you imagine each little switch, a lot of those switches look exactly the same. And if you imagine we just send that switch to the GPU once and then tell it to draw it 1,000 times, it's like, hey, I got this.
Yeah.
And as part of that, we can then actually expose some of that in tooling to the power users. So you could go in and say, you know what, I'm going to redesign my cockpit, and put all the switches where I want, and stuff like that. And I think that gives you a lot of agency, and that's almost another whole sub game. I don't think that's necessarily something the same way with a subpart editing that every player will use, but I think that it's a cool gateway for someone to go down. You're looking for those pathways for someone to go, man, I'm really interested in this area of the game. And I think that's where inspiration can do a lot of things. You need to sort of give people a buffet, and then once they lock in on something, let them go down that path. So yeah, IVA is a big one. I'm also a big fan of Kerbal OS. So letting people automate stuff as much as possible. That I feel very comfortable with because we did a very cool part of Stationeers as we actually added a MIPS-like language that lets you automate pretty much everything. So yeah, I think expect to see a lot on that front too.
That's awesome. And I'm sure the people who are, really into flight sims, and I think you even mentioned that you have a pretty extensive flight sim setup. I know they're going
I
to be
do.
excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
you
no,
can set.
I have all my stuff here. It's all
Oh,
packed
cool.
away at the moment so I can do interviews. So unfortunately it's all, yeah.
But yeah, there will be punk because I know that now that you can and move the different tools to different windows, and people I'm sure are going to come up with some really crazy setups for IVA flights. And yeah, I
Yeah,
can't wait.
the panels are resetting at the moment, which is internally one of our most requested features. Um, uh, and that's just more a crashy problem because at the moment, if you pull a panel off the main window and then you resize, a lot of stuff can break. So basically, we're just sort of hard resetting the position of all the windows constantly. And if we serialize out, it means windows can end up somewhere. If a player plugs in another screen or unplugs one, the window can be somewhere and they can never get it back. So we've just kind of done a not a hack, but just the brutal kind of, okay, every time you change the window, we're just going to reset all the positions back to where they were. But yeah, expect that to come in at some point once we've tidied that up where the windows will be persistent and you can position them where you want and it will remember them.
Oh, excellent. I think my final question is about science mode, and I know a lot of people have asked about how science mode is going to work. Is it going to be similar to Kerbal Space Program? And you've mentioned having, showing off the team of people that are involved in these kinds of missions. How do you see science mode working, and how do you see showing off all of those different positions?
Look, I don't actually know about that. I think it's not something. I think that's one of those things that I'm going to defer to some of our other people on it. I'm very fortunate in that a lot of people have reached out to me from some of the most prestigious science organizations in the world. And a number of them have some really cool thoughts on how to approach this gathering science. I'm obviously extremely passionate about making you care about the crew and the people behind it. It's something I have a background in and something I'm very passionate about. So that I'm prepared to, in many cases, say I strongly think we should do this. In terms of the science mode, I know what I want out of it, but I think that I think I'm going to listen a lot more to what a lot of the other people on the team have opinions about the science stuff and the community as well. So I don't really know exactly how that's going to shake out, to be honest. I really liked the Copernicus mod and some of the changes in there. I definitely am very interested in how science gets transferred through comms networks and stuff like that. But I think that's just one of those features that I just don't think I'm the best person to make those decisions on.
Okay. Yeah. I think KSA has the potential to be one of those games that ends up being, so much more than the sum of its parts, like you've mentioned. So for me personally, I do want to say thank you for taking the risk on making this game and kind of picking up the torch. I know a lot of people were really disappointed, when we heard that KSP2 had ended its development, and yeah, you kind of.
I think yeah, I mean, I think I get you get that, but I think there's a lot of concern, and I think it's a legitimate concern from the community about some of the decisions we made, like the not being on Steam. There were a number of people who were concerned definitely about the choice of Kittens. There were a number of people concerned about using our own engine versus using Unity, and I think those shouldn't be swatted away. I think they're all legitimate concerns, and for example, I am very concerned about a decision to not follow a traditional model on Steam. But I also look at our numbers, and I posted our financials in the KSA chat, in the public chat. I've often posted our financials. The reality is that if we keep doing what we're doing, we would go out of business. So we have to try. We have to try different ways. I presume it's the same as if a YouTuber at the moment just tries to live off advertising. They're not going anywhere.
Right.
And I think it's not the reality for every game studio, but for us, we're in that lower middle end of the market. We have to find another path, or sell. And but I think that doesn't invalidate people's concerns. There are a lot of things I would think are concerning about KSA as a project. I just think that they're necessary problems. Just because they're risky or dangerous doesn't mean that they're not important issues to solve. You could say the same thing about various different launch vehicles in real life that have been developed over time. You could look at them and say that's crazy. Even the idea of how Apollo was approached, with like Lunar Rendezvous and stuff like that. Originally, it was like, that's crazy. Why are you doing that? It's so dangerous, so difficult, so much more configuration that's done. But sometimes to achieve the mission, you have to look at some very dangerous and risky options, and try and assemble the best team you can and just really work those problems to the end. And I think that KSA is an example of that. And actually, I think it was as Nate said in your video, if there's one game that deserves it, maybe it's this kind of game. If there's one game that deserves to hand the mantle of supporting its development, it's that. Certainly, I would argue, I would much rather be coming to the community and saying, hey, can you fund the game, than going to someone like Take-Two. We saw how that worked out.
Right.
So if we want to get the money to make these kind of games, I think the best place to go to is the community, if we can make that work.
I completely agree. I am a little bit surprised at some of the pushback on the Kittens. I love the idea of the Kittens. But it does seem to be a bit of a hot point issue for some people. A lot of people.
Yeah.
I don't get that personally.
I get it. I totally get it. I think a lot of it comes back to just people's love of Kerbal Space Program, and
Yeah.
I think you did a really good job in that three-part interview with Felipe of just sort of Felipe doesn't realize sometimes, or maybe it's difficult for him to fully understand because you can never experience your product as a customer does truly, just how much of an emotional impact Kerbal's left on people. And it really came out of nowhere. It came absolutely out of nowhere. And I think that's why people are so upset with the end of Kerbal Space Program and why I so aggressively went at positioning KSA as a spiritual successor, because I felt like we needed to break out of this sort of hope that it would get resurrected, because it really got just driven into the ground and then tossed away as discarded garbage. And um, I think that really hurt people, and I think it's very difficult for people to let go of that. You know, Kerbal even now, just there's this emotional response from opening it up and hearing the music. And it's I think it's hard for people to face the reality of what happened to Felipe, what
Yeah.
happened to the staff at who worked on the various versions of it, what happened to people like Nate, even I'm sure the people various up the chain there. I think the emotional toll of that will never be truly understood by customers and will never be truly shared. And I think a lot of that can then transfer into people finding it really hard to let that go. And then also, kittens aren't the most inspired answer. They're not. Um, they certainly weren't from our side. But a lot of this is about risk management. We are taking some of the biggest risks that you can take in game development, and you can't take every risk. We
Yeah.
are taking very calculated risks. We're taking risks that we think we have the team members for. We're taking risks that we have assessed for the last 5 years. We've been saying we should be trying more direct to consumer. We should be trying some stuff off Steam. We released Stationeers off Steam, and we found a few people paid $1,000 for it. This was a year or so ago. And that started the idea of, hey, actually, maybe we could make this direct to consumer contributions only approach work. And yeah, a very long winded way of saying I really understand. Yeah.
Well, I think this approach also just builds so much trust with the community because a big issue for people with Kerbal Space Program 2 was they paid a full AAA price right out the gate. And I know it was early access, and everybody should keep in mind when you're buying an early access game, this may be the last update the game ever gets. But, people paid, 50, 60 US dollars for a game that then just kind of vanished. And yeah, I know I can understand how a lot of people felt a little bit scammed, especially with the backing of a major studio like Take-Two. This wasn't a small indie studio that was developing. So, giving people the opportunity to play the game for free and try it out and then say, you know what, this is worth 20, 30, 50, 100 plus dollars to some people. I think it does build a ton of trust in the community. So I think that's great. I really do.
Yeah, and look, I think a lot of that involves in establishing trust with the community in terms of delivering on stuff, giving out the builds, doing public change logs. And I think different people will sort of join the movement at different times. And I think that's totally fine. You'll see a lot of people saying, oh, I'm waiting for blah, I'm waiting for blah. Even watching my brother's kids play the game, one of them, actually the younger one, is so interested in science and space that he was just absolutely loving where it's at now, because he was just very interested in looking at the planets and moving the rockets around. Whereas actually the older one, he was clearly more interested in building the rockets. So he was like, I'll wait till later.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty normal. Everyone has their things that KSP brought to them. And so different people, I think, will kind of be waiting for us to hit different gates as to whether or not they think the project has legs. And some people, I think, are legitimately just don't get the off Steam thing, and I think will want to wait a lot longer before they trust it.
Yeah, I can understand that as well. The last thing I want to ask, and I know you probably don't have an answer to this, is when do you foresee a 1.0 release? Like, how far out do you think we realistically are from seeing I know it's never finished. Games are born, not released now, but when do you see that happening?
So if I take Stationeers for an example, our approach with Stationeers is going to be when the community demand that it's 1.0. So we already have see people with Stationeers and the reviews saying, and even customers on Discord and on Steam comments saying, "Hey, the game is sort of done. Why haven't you done it as well 1.0 yet?" And our plan is actually to run a vote and have the community and look for a super majority, not just a simple majority. But
Oh, that's
once a
such a
super
cool idea.
majority
Yeah.
of customers decide that it's 1.0, then we'll put it into 1.0. I think the same kind of model should work for KSA. Not that it would really change anything at all for me personally. Um, we'd continue doing it, but I think if you think about it, all 1.0 really means is has the project achieved its core feature roles to a point where we can sort of put a seal of approval on it. And the best place to get that seal of approval from is customers. So if the super majority of customers agree that the product is ready for other people, then it's ready for other people. So I think that's probably how we'd approach it. We just need to look for a way to do that, and we haven't found one that's good yet that involves not just people from Discord, but people from other places. That's something we'll try out probably first with Stationeers, and then, so I suppose I would reflect that question to the people watching this now. Go download KSA and then follow it, download it every 3 months and decide for yourself. You'll be the ones that describe when it's ready. I think the other thing that's really important is content creators like yourself, not just being sort of sycophants to the project. So that's why there's no requirements for you and the Veterans channel and stuff like that to agree with what the decisions we make and stuff like that. There's many decisions that we don't necessarily like that we've had to make about the project as well. But sometimes we just have to make them. But I think, yeah, there's this ecosystem that needs to exist. It's why if people have gotten to this point of the video, it's so important they have, because I think people don't realize how important content creators are in terms of letting people deep dive on games and find out about games and stuff like that. So we need kind of these independent content creators who are making content. We need independent game developers who are supported, and both of those need support from customers. So if people like your content, they need to be supporting you. If they like a game developer's content, they need to be supporting those game developers. Otherwise, it's the big companies that are winning. It's the big companies that are getting takeovers on Steam. It's the big companies. It's just like the iOS store now. If
Yeah.
you've got hundreds of millions of dollars to spend, then you're going to win, and the small companies will just disappear. And if you go to Steam all the time, you will just see small companies going out of business constantly. And it's the same for content creators, just, the recent changes to YouTube and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, that the ecosystem of KSA is one of the most important parts to me, which is why we really encourage our developers to go and start posting dev blogs. I do understand a lot of people don't like dev blogs on Discord. So that's why we're going to start using Woo more, post the dev blogs in there. There's the forums there as well, rather than just putting them on Discord. Discord's easy for us because we can talk live with people, but I think, formats like this are fantastic because we can, I don't know, go deep on topics and stuff like that.
Yeah. And thanks again for including me in the industry pre-alpha. That was just really cool to get to take a look at that game early on and interact with everybody that was also playing it that early. It was a really fun experience. So again, thanks for including me on that.
Well, it was very useful for us because we didn't really have the infrastructure at that support point to support masses of people downloading it. What people don't realize is for the entire history of it, the download was super easy to guess. And I'm quite sure a number of people guessed it. It actually only got properly leaked about 8 hours before the actual build went live. And I remember internally in the team, a lot of people were like, we can't just have, because it was ksa.rwu.com, that was the download link.
Yeah.
And literally anybody could go to it and get it. And people were like, we can't do that. And I was like, okay, what's the worst that happens? The it gets out and people go download it. Too many people download it and the website crashes. It's like, if that happens, that happens. I didn't want to obfuscate the everything and get us into some complex download and complex logins and authentication, because then we'd be just getting in the way of stuff. And yeah, and so I think you and the other content creators were able to make videos so that people could learn about it without us overloading the systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did find it on one forum. Somebody had posted it, but it had only been viewed like 2 times. And so I kind of thought, okay, better to just let sleeping. It was like a month old. I was like, better just let a sleeping dog lie and not Streisand
Yeah,
affect
some
this and
people
try and point
message
it
me
out.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, again, like, oh no, the worst that happens is heaps of people want to try out the private pre-alpha. Like, if it's the worst thing that
Yeah.
happens, like, if that's the worst things that happens, I'm happy. The same way as if the most objectionable part of the game for people is the kittens, I am going to be so thrilled. If,
Yeah.
if if someone out there is playing the game and they're like, I don't like the kittens, I'm like, I have done my job. If that's your biggest complaint, I
Absolutely.
will be very, very, very happy. If your complaint is performance and the other things, that's when and quality, that's when I'm more concerned.
Yeah. Well, I won't take any more of your time. I know you and the team are incredibly busy with all of the feedback I'm sure that you've been receiving this week now that the game is out. But before we wrap this up, is there anything else that you want people to know about the project?
No, I think we've pretty much covered on everything. I think we really want people to be spokespeople, not salespeople. So I definitely think if you know people who would be interested in it, feel free to introduce it to them. But I don't try and sell people. We're not trying to sell people either. We should all be skeptical of stuff, including the stuff that we're doing. But that's the advantage of having the build there to try out. If you do want to see this kind of content, it's kind of like with YouTubers, where they should subscribe to channels like yours. They should offer money to channels like yours and the other content creators if they want to see this content. Otherwise, they will not see that content. And the same goes for games like KSA. If you want to see this stuff, then you have to morally make sure that it exists, because it won't. Otherwise, the only way games will get made is companies like Take-Two will fund them, and they're just looking, they're not looking at games in the same way we are.
Yeah, and they're not made by developers. They're made by lawyers and investors, and those people maybe don't fully understand always what it takes to make a game or the beast that it can be. But
Well,
yeah,
I think they do. I think that's part of the problem, is that reduces everything to a number, and that's what happened on the iOS store. And it suddenly just becomes about, basically, your user acquisition cost needs to be $1, but your revenue per player needs to be 1.1, and that's just what they're looking for. Whereas I actually think that if you look at all of the real progress in humankind, it has come from people breaking out of that and trying different stuff. So that's why whenever anybody gets really skeptical about why are they doing this is crazy, they should just do that. If you look at the history of Steam, it's funny, because a lot of the arguments for people of like why you shouldn't go off Steam, they were the things that were the exact arguments people were using, because people were pretty unhappy about Steam when it first came out.
Oh, I remember.
People don't
Yeah.
realize that. There was a lot of complaints about Steam. And it's just funny to me because I read some of the comments and they're carbon copies of the things people see when Steam come out.
Yeah.
Um, but I think all of human progress comes not from looking at things as a number, um, but just wanting to move the needle forward and wanting to push the envelope, try something different. And I think you see that time and again in space flight and aerospace in general. And I think it's about damn time that we had some good news in terms of social media and video games and stuff like that. So I think, yeah, let's keep doing something different.
Yeah. And to do something new, you have to do something new.
Well, you have to take risks.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt we're taking some huge risks here. I just think that, as Nate Simpson said, if there's ever a game that deserves it, this is the game. This is the game that deserves us to try and find a better way.
I agree. Absolutely. So yeah, if you can contribute, go to awu.com. And again, that link will be in the description below. Thanks for so much for taking the time to talk to me. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's great to talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.